I want to welcome you all tonight here to the New York Society Library for our 28th Annual New York City Book Awards. Yes, I know, it's pretty incredible. 28 is pretty incredible, but for those of you who may have just become acquainted with the New York Society Library, and I suspect there probably are a few of you here who hadn't heard about us before, we are the oldest library and cultural institution in New York City, founded in 1754. So we are actually celebrating our 270th anniversary this year. So yes, that's that's worth a clap too. And lest you get the wrong impression about us, it has happened. We are a membership library that is open to all. We are a society of bibliophiles. And we welcome everyone to join us. We'd love to have you as a member, which does have its benefits. There are 300,000 books right here in our open stacks and beautiful reading and writing spaces. But everyone is welcome to come and join us as a guest in our public reference room and in our exhibition gallery as well. So however you come find us, we would love to have you visit. And I think that you will agree, as the oldest library in the city, we are in a unique position to recognize and honor the best books about New York City that recognize the literary quality or historical importance that evoke the spirit or enhance appreciation of New York City. So therefore, I want to congratulate the 5 winners of this year's New York City Book Awards: Aisha Abdel Gawad, Jonathan Lethem, Prudence Pfeiffer, Jesse Rifkin, and Alexander Stilla. Thank you all for these extraordinary books that shine a great light on New York City. And I always try to read all of the winning books by the night of the ceremony, and every year I invariably fail because time is my enemy. However, I'm always in awe of our jury because they somehow managed to read, review, and fiercely debate the merits of more than 150 books over the course of about 8 months. Yeah, just think about that. My deep appreciation and admiration, as always, to our New York City Book Awards jury chair, Nikhil Iyengar, jurors Debbie Applegate, Kate Pfeiffer, Anita Kapadia, James Mello, and Tracy Kwan. Thank you. Thank you very much. Immense thanks also to Katie Freakus, our staff liaison to the jury, who somehow manages to keep track of all of those 150 books and all of the jurors as well. Thanks to Sayer Holiday and Maria Luisa Manda, our events team, for orchestrating tonight's ceremony. Thank you. And to Jenny Lawrence for making the Hornblower Award possible for the best New York City-related book by a first-time author. I now have the pleasure of introducing Ellen Eisenman. Ellen is a longtime trustee of the library, who has also served as chair of the library's Board of Trustees. We are extraordinarily grateful to her for her very generous support for the New York City Book Awards for many, many years. Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you, Carolyn, for those lovely remarks. And it is incredible. I called Sarah and I said, how many years have I sponsored these awards for? And she said, hold on, let me check the file. She said, it's 15. I said, 15 years, wow. Often I've said it, and today I mean it just as much, that newly published books aren't celebrated enough. It is hugely fulfilling then to see this formidable array of writing talent applauded here tonight. Over the library's 270 years, it has become tradition for a jury here to select extraordinary books brought to fruition by committed authors. It's all been happening, as Carolyn said, since the 1990s. Please join me now in welcoming Nikhil Iyengar, the jury chair, who has worked so hard with his fellow jurors to make the choices we'll soon be hearing about. Thank you all again for coming tonight.
Thank you, Ellen. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. The New York City Book Awards are a celebration of books and our city, and we're privileged this evening to honor the exemplary works of literature that are this year's winning books. They each shine a new and unique light on our city and light a path for other works of creative expression and scholarship to follow in their wake. I would like to thank the members of the jury whose dedication, thoughtfulness, and literary stewardship took us from September to March, from an initial list of more than 150 books, as Caroline mentioned, to the 5 winners of this year's awards. I'd like to thank former jury chairs Warren Wexler and Bianca Calabresi, with whom it was my pleasure to serve on prior juries. I'd like to thank Katie Frickas for making the administrative process run with the smoothness of a Rolls-Royce engine, and always with smile and great humor. Katie, if you could stand, please. And thank you. And now, members of the jury, if you could please stand, say, call your name. Anita Kapadia? Oh, actually, everybody stand, please. Just make it. Debbie Applegate? James Mello? Kate Pfeiffer? Tracy Kwan? Thank you, Ellen Eisman and Jenny Lawrence, for your generosity and support to the library and for these awards. Thank you, Carolyn, and all the staff in the library. The books that have won the New York City Book Award, stretching back across all these years, form a living tapestry of the city. Past, present, future, what was, what may have been, what might be. The city that never sleeps also never ceases to inspire. Each new perspective added to the literary canon, each story told with a fresh voice, adds to the richness of the tapestry. Congratulations again to this year's award winners. I'd now like to invite Anita Kapadia to present the Hornblower Award. Thank you.
Good evening. It's my pleasure tonight to present the 2024 Hornblower Award. This award is given to an excellent New York City-related book written by a first-time author. This year's winner, Between Two Moons by Aisha Abdelgawad, is a rich portrait of a family and a community in Bay Ridge. Taking place during Ramadan, the novel follows Amira and her twin sister Lena as they step toward their adult lives amidst crises in their home and neighborhood. With remarkable suspense, the story explores complex relationships with institutions, family, faith, law enforcement, the city, and the nation. The novel asks us to consider the effects of post-9/11 Islamophobia on the Muslim experience in our city. And rather than offer simplistic explanations, the novel poses interesting questions. What does it mean to be a loyal daughter, sister, or friend? How do we honor our past and move into the future? Whom do you trust? What is safety, and what price are we willing to pay for it? With great tenderness, the story illustrates the difficulty of finding yourself when you are often unseen, but also what it means when invisibility is one of your most precious protections. Members of our jury praise this novel for many reasons, but especially for showing us a place in our city that many of us had not seen before. It's my honor to present the Hornblower Award tonight to Aisha Abdelgawad for her novel, Between Two Moons.
Thank you so much. That was such a lovely description, and thank you so much, the New York Society Library, for recognizing this book, capturing the unique spirit of Bay Ridge. I loved to hear you say that introduced you to a neighborhood maybe you haven't been to. That was really important to me, thinking of Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, as a character in the novel. I started working at a community center in Bay Ridge in 2009, at a time, probably not unlike now, when it was inundated with undercover law enforcement and informants under constant surveillance. And despite that, I've really never felt more at home anywhere. And on my first week on the job, when I was taking my lunch break at a local market, an elderly Arab woman approached me in the produce section, called me her daughter, and asked me to buy her a carton of strawberries. She was weeping and confused, telling me about her village back in Palestine and how they grew the sweetest fruits. I bought her the berries. And many months later, she walked into the community center and placed a carton of strawberries on my desk. So it was really the Arab women I met in Bay Ridge who taught me how to insist on community, despite all external attempts to fracture it. I've been thinking of that grandmother in Bay Ridge a lot lately, as I watch the Arabs of her homeland, Palestine, suffer unimaginable horrors. And so as I accept this award, I feel compelled to honor them, especially the Arab women of Palestine, who are the guardians of our traditions and history, and who, I have complete faith, will defy all attempts to silence them. I've always said that Between Two Moons was a love letter to the Arab community of Bay Ridge. And so I thank you for amplifying that love and for amplifying the voices of Arab women, which feels even more essential today. Thank you so much.
Hello. This award celebrates writers who capture New York as it really is, not as it's been mythologized. Brooklyn Crime Novel is like a Frederick Wiseman documentary in words. Jonathan Lethem has dropped readers verite style into the Brooklyn of his childhood, where we too are now feral children. Taunting the screamer, the woman whose howls can be heard from her third-floor window of a brownstone on Hoyt Street, and stuffing our mugging money into our pockets. Jonathan and I grew up on the Upper West Side, and we too had mugging money. I was recently talking to some friends, when I was reading your book, some non-New York friends, and they had no idea what mugging money was. Astounded to hear such a thing existed. Brooklyn Crime Novels gives readers a raw and authentic Brooklyn. It is impressionistic, it is illuminating, it is shocking, it is a time machine back to a time in the city which people like to conjure up and call the bad old days. And those complicated days and the characters who inhabited them, the children, the parents, the grifters, the developers, the cops, the shop owners, the shoplifters, are captured in sound, smell, and spirit in this incredible novel. This is a novel unlike any other I've read. It's intoxicating, it's curious, it's fascinating. It's clearly written by someone who knows this topic well enough to dig down deep and then to keep digging. Not only did Jonathan Lethem grow up in Brooklyn, he's been writing about Brooklyn on and off for more than 2 decades. Jonathan, over the course of your career, you have received many, many accolades and won awards, and we are delighted that you'll be able to add this onto your list that includes a MacArthur Foundation Fellow Genius Grant, a National Book Critics Circle Award, and a host of best-selling books.
Thanks so much. I'm really honored and thrilled and excited to be here at this library. It all begins for me, at the Pacific Street branch of the Brooklyn Public Library, corner of Pacific and 4th Avenue, and slightly less exalted surroundings, but there was a spinner rack of science fiction, and I made sure that I read every single book on that spinner rack. I mean, it's the the third ever Carnegie Library that was bestowed. So it's a pretty special building in its way. It's got some provenance. I'm just so grateful to everyone who's embraced this unusual book and spent time with my kids, my Dean Street boys. It's okay.
I was actually looking you up on Google.
I hope I'm still there. Yeah, there's so many people I would thank if they were all here, but they don't know. What I want to do is thank two people. One who isn't here. My secret weapon for this book was a kind of a Brooklyn, a feral researcher genius named Brian Berger, who went into the microfiche kingdom for me and came out with all the treasure from under the dragon's nose. This book is full of information that doesn't exist on Google, actually. That's sort of only in physical archives and tattered newspaper clippings or microfiche files. Some of the ways in which this book is unusual is really specifically because it's beyond the reach of digital information. And Brian Berger was this sort of keeper of the crypt keeper, I guess, with the keys to the kingdom. And then Anna Moskavakis, my beloved, who gave me the courage to write a book like this. So thank you, and thank everyone here. Really a pleasure.
Good evening. Just want to make sure I'm okay. Prudence Pfeiffer is an art historian, one of my favorite. Prudence Pfeiffer is an art historian. She's one of my favorite essayists. Also managing editor of the creative team at Museum of Modern Art, and so much more. The Slip, her first book, has been longlisted for the National Book Award and shortlisted for the Plutarch Award Best Biography. It's a New York Times notable book and a finalist for the Gotham Book Prize. The Slip is the previously untold story of an obscure street at the lower tip of Manhattan that changed American art forever. And it's about the artists, from poets to painters, who got their start there in the late 1950s and early 60s. To introduce The Slip, I want to show you briefly this artifact of the 1980s. It was created in 1989 by a group of New York artists who were members of ACT UP. Along the bottom, you can see the words AIDS crisis. Up top is a reference to the Stonewall riot in Greenwich Village. The word riot is at the center. Now, riot is a riff on love, on Robert Indiana's love sculpture, which began to emerge as a motif while he was living on Coenties Slip. That work began as a painting in 1961, and by the 1970s, it's a world-famous sculpture featured on postage stamps. But the early versions on paper and canvas, the MoMA greeting card, that's where we go to find the New York City origins of this ubiquitous sculpture. That's also where we find the origins of that 1989 statement. So this is why The Slip is rightly seen as a significant contribution to art history, but it's also part of New York's political history. The ACT UP art makers were not just riffing. There was a hard edge to their politics, and it was the Reagan-Bush era. AIDS activists were pushing against the liberalism of the 60s and 70s embodied in that love sculpture that we've all seen. Prudence Pfeiffer, however, gets us to see Robert Indiana's love sculpture as something different. Instead, it's a project of Eisenhower-era New York. Robert Indiana moved to Coenties Slip in 1956 for the raw loft space that made it possible to work and to be with Ellsworth Kelly, the painter who was already living in one of those illegal lofts. When he came here from Indiana as Robert Clark, this was 1954, a time when New York City witnessed the harshest crackdown on homosexuality after decades of progress. That is, I'm quoting directly from Prudence Pfeiffer there. By telling the stories of the Coenties Slip artists, Prudence Pfeiffer shows how gay history is indeed everybody's history. Now, my experience of the book has been love at first sight, and Robert Indiana was my pathway into the slip. But each reader will find their own way into this history. So for you or the person sitting next to you, it might be Agnes Martin, the abstract painter who came here from Saskatchewan and also New Mexico somehow. It's all true. It could be Delphine Seyrig, the actress who made her film debut in Pull My Daisy, the beat classic, while she was living on Coenties Slip with the painter Jack Youngerman. That came as a shock to me. I never expected to learn that this feminist icon, who was the founder of the Simone de Beauvoir Audiovisual Center in Paris, had New York City roots. It's a new way to think about her starring role in Chantal Akerman's 1975 film, Jeanne Dielman, because Akerman was also a New Yorker. And I returned to the film, Jeanne Dielman, after reading The Slip. I now see the influence, which I didn't see before. I see the influence of New York and Coenties Slip in the atmospherics of this feminist masterpiece. So I promise you this book will send you on a similar mission to revisit a work that is already important to you. You'll see it differently. The 7 artists at the center of this group biography, including James Rosenquist and Lenore Tawney, were practitioners of something Prudence Pfeiffer calls collective solitude. When you delve into The Slip, I have a suggestion. Let's think about how we embellish our collective solitudes. That is our approach to solidarity. Whether we are art makers or art lovers, new arrivals or long-established residents of this city, this is a collective practice we should all cherish. And I do believe that the author, Prudence Pfeiffer, is here this evening.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. I'm really honored to receive a New York City Book Award, and in such good company as well. Thank you, New York Society Library and distinguished jurors. This award is particularly meaningful to me, coming from the first library in the city, once located right around the corner from Coenties Slip, the street that is the protagonist of my story, and a spot frequented by Herman Melville. Maybe the not-so-secret greatest honor of this award is getting a year's membership to this beautiful library. There are many people who made this book what it is, including my editors, Gail Winston and Emily Graff, and the assistants of Isabel Flower and Jessica Butler. and the artists and artist estates who generously shared their time and materials and memories with me. But I want to particularly thank the SLIP community who is with me here tonight. My agent, Elias Altman, who believed in me before I even felt qualified to consider myself a writer. My publicist at Harper, Heather Drucker, who has, with unflagging enthusiasm, helped this book reach a broadest audience possible. And most of all, my family, my parents, Sheila and Steve Pfeiffer. Sorry. And my husband, Charles Fulford. I grew up without television in a small house overtaken by books, and I have vivid memories of reading them all together as a family, as well as the perfect solitude of being lost in one. I'm indebted to my parents for that habitat and fostering those habits. The only way this book could have happened, despite an intense full-time job, the birth of 3 children, and a pandemic, was with the support and childcare and time, most of all time, given to me by my family. One of the joys of being an art historian, writing a book about how a 3-block street shaped a group of artists and how those artists in turn shaped a place forever, was learning about things far outside my wheelhouse. I looked at a lot of art inspired by and made from the wreckage of the city's many former lives, but I also read 19th century police blotters and elevated train accident reports and treatises on sailmaking lofts converted into tent production during the Civil War. Many unexpected characters crossed paths with Coenties Slip, from Melville to Bernice Abbott to Harry Houdini to Anais Nin to Robert Moses. The conditions that allowed the artists to live and work on Coenties Slip in the 50s and 60s remain urgently relevant today in New York, including a safe harbor for LGBTQ+ communities and affordable housing. This unique street gave an unlikely group of artists the space to figure out what path they wanted to take in art, and also the community to make that struggle less lonely. These artists saw New York in a new way and made art to reflect it. I hope the Slip, too, allows readers to see the city anew and as a place constantly shaping our own creative endeavors. Thank you so much.
Good evening again, everyone. It's my distinct privilege and pleasure to present this next New York City Book Award to Jesse Rifkin for This Must Be the Place. Jesse is the owner and operator of Walk on the Wild Side Tours NYC, a music history walking tour company, and he consults as a pop music historian for the Association of Cultural Equity. His work has been featured in the New York Times, Condé Nast Traveler, Vice, and Four Doors Travel. Prior to his work as a historian, he spent 12 years touring the country as a working musician, playing at CBGB, Lincoln Center, and venues of every size and shape in between. Music, like Proust's Madeleines, has the power to transport us, to take us back to that specific place we were when we first heard a tune, a lyric, a song. This Must Be the Place weaves that same magic, but rather specially in both directions, from music to place and place to music. This is a fabulous book, an engaging read, and as vital a cornerstone of the history of our city as the buildings and neighborhoods that housed the artistic communities and musical movements brought so vividly to life in the pages of this book. This Must Be the Place takes us from Greenwich Village in the 40s to Williamsburg in the 2000s, from Washington Square Park incubating folk music in the 60s to the empty warehouses of Brooklyn, where indie rock in the 2000s came together. A key theme that emerges is that successful musicians were nurtured by scenes, and that these scenes themselves were the product of circumstances. It takes a very special kind of scholarship and keen understanding of a subject to produce a book as entertaining, informative, and transportive as This Must Be the Place. We don't just hear the strum of guitars in coffee shops and parks. We feel the aspirations and creative inspirations of the musicians and the forces of history and economics that led them to that particular point in time and space, and fostered the artistic communities that gave birth to musical movements that went on to etch themselves in the fabric of culture. I'd like to leave you with two extracts from this wonderful book. The first one is from the start of chapter 3, which is the beginning of a new age, Max's Kansas City glam rock and the birth of punk. When the story of Max's Kansas City is told, it's usually told as a tale of beautiful people. Warhol superstars and art stars, actors, models, glam rock pioneers, Iggy Pop, John and Yoko. Max's was the legendary anything goes party scene where they mixed it up late in the night. While all of this is accurate, it glosses over the true engine that made Max's run: food. Not that the food served at Max's was good. By all reports, it was underwhelming at best. I'll leave you to read the book to find out what was so special about the food. No spoilers there. And now, another extract from the closing pages of the book. It's easy to bemoan the loss of old NYC, the collapse of the music industry, or the effects of social media and cell phones, and call it a day. But as we've seen, the best scenes are born out of a mixture of dissatisfaction with the present circumstances and the ability to notice and seize the opportunities that they provide. There is always something of value to be said, some new way of saying it, and somewhere to do so. On behalf of the jury and the New York Society Library, I'm honored to present Jesse Rifkin with this award.
Far out. Thank you so much for the kind words, Nikhil, and thank you so much to the New York Society Library for this incredible honor. It really means a lot. This book it's a history book, but one of the points that I was hoping to make with this book is that vibrant music and nightlife communities in New York are not a thing of the past. They didn't end with Giuliani's nightlife crackdowns or with 9/11. The city has always and will always be a magnet for malcontents and weirdos who are able to notice and creatively exploit. I cannibalized this from the part of the book that he read. Are able to notice and creatively exploit the opportunities that their specific circumstances provide. This stuff is very much alive. That's not to say it isn't in danger. The more expensive New York becomes, the harder it is for artists who aren't independently wealthy to even survive, let alone create. As neighborhood after neighborhood gentrifies at warp speed, rising rents and noise complaints are used to shutter small clubs and DIY spaces. Authentic creative communities are displaced, and in comes another Sweetgreen. So if you care about this stuff at all, which has got to be at least like a couple of you, please seek out and support working musicians and small independent venues. Find spots off the beaten path that are incubating new sounds and artists that excite you, and patronize them regularly. And yeah, hey, I mean, if you're really loaded, consider investing in the New York music scene by partially subsidizing a small venue or an independent record label. If you own property, consider renting space to artists and musicians and venues at below market rates, because that's honestly what it's going to take. All right. Thank you.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. Because of Alexander Stiller, the Upper West Side is way, way more interesting than it ever was. And the culprit is his book, The Sullivanians. When I began to read the book, I just couldn't believe it, literally. I was reading, and I was expecting for some sort of explanation for what was happening. And the explanation was that it was just happening. And then I kept thinking, how is it possible then that so many people who were intelligent and cultured and worldly savvy could have been seduced into that system and that kind of environment in which ultimately went against their best wishes and their best desires and their best nature as people. And one of the measures of the impact of book on me personally is that I read it first and then I kept it by my desk, and periodically I would just open it at random. And every time I read one of the case histories, it was as riveting as the first time. And I said, there has to be something behind this particular event or development that people like Jackson Pollock and the critic Clement Greenberg and the choreographer Lucinda Childs and the writer Richard Price and so many intellectuals and lawyers and professors felt somehow that that was the right place to be. And then I began to think about what was it. And in my mind, I began to construct my own narrative of what the book told me. And I thought, well, maybe what it is that when someone or something seems to give us all the right answers, then we begin to be hypnotized by the answers, and we forget about the nature and the provenance of the questions. And the book, to me, is a demonstration, beautifully written and meticulously researched, about how so many different people were hypnotized by the right answers, or at least what they perceived to be the right answers. And then today, I walk down West End Avenue, and I look at the facade, and I have to wonder, I have to say, what is in there? That's your fault. So The Sullivanians is a book that to me was a tremendous surprise because it shed some kind of light on an obscure corner of this beloved city, which I am passionate about it, and everything about New York is extremely interesting to me, and that to me was a major, major revelation. And I'm very grateful for the work that Alexander Stiller did. And but then when I began to read more about him, it was no surprise, because he has written other books with such mouth-watering titles, such as Excellent Cadavers, or about the mafia, and The Future of the Past, which I think there's a little poetry just there in that title, about the preservation of different cultural heritages. And many other books that were not only nominated, but won many awards. And Alexander Stiller is now the São Paulo Professor of International Journalism at Columbia University. And it's a great pleasure and with great gratitude on behalf of this New York Society Library to give you this award.
Thank you so much. That's incredibly kind and generous. And thank you to all the jury and to all of you for this really, really meaningful award. It does mean especially much to me to receive an award that is related to books about New York, because this is very much of a New York story. I'd actually thought about, when I was casting around for a title, that I would call it Upper West Side Story. But then I thought that having a kind of joke as a title might not work, and because it actually does get into, and as the book progresses, gets darker, and I didn't want to make light of that. The group that I wrote about was this community that existed on the Upper West Side that began in the 50s. As you heard, it began as a psychoanalytic institute called the Sullivan Institute, which had sort of radical ideas about psychoanalysis. And their idea was that people grew through contact with other people, and therefore that by definition, the nuclear family was limiting and suffocating, and that monogamous marriage was by definition limiting and suffocating, and therefore people needed to get out and see other people, sleep with lots of people, preferably not their spouse too often. Eventually, they encouraged their patients to live with other patients in large group apartments on the Upper West Side, and they sort of established a kind of utopian alternative community, which for a period of time was very compelling to people, and then got increasingly controlling and strange. They started a kind of avant-garde political theater in 1975 called the Fourth Wall Political Theater. And as one of my sources, one of the 10 children of the founder, Saul Newton, put it, they combined the worst of psychoanalysis, Marxism, and musical theater, which I think is as good a summary as you could want. So I kind of, I mean, you say that it was a revelation. It was a revelation for me as well, because I've lived on the Upper West Side for many years, almost from the time I got out of college. And so when I began hearing in a quite random fashion from friends of mine about people they knew who'd been in this unusual group, I began to think, like, how could I have lived in this neighborhood for 30 years and known nothing about this group, which had this remarkable and strange existence that was essentially hidden in plain sight. Sort of everybody knew about it, but nobody knew about it kind of thing, where people had friends who had been in the group, or they lived near an apartment where they were Sullivanians living, but no one quite knew what took place in these strange apartments where large numbers of people lived. And what makes it fascinating, as you indicated, is that these were New Yorkers. These were highly educated, really smart people who were high-functioning professionals, who were lawyers and professors, artists, writers. You know, even into the 70s, you know, people like Richard Price, wonderful novelist, was in the group. Lucinda Childs, the dancer, known for Einstein on the Beach and so forth. This was not an ashram in India or rural Vermont. And to the extent that I can answer the question that you pose, is like, why? One of the first people I interviewed who had basically kidnapped her own daughter, whom she'd been denied access to, in front of the building where she and her husband lived. She said, you must be wondering why so many smart people ended up doing such crazy things. And she answered her own question by saying, belonging. This group gave us a sense of belonging, and that's a very powerful thing to give to people. As I discovered doing the research and reporting, there were a lot of layers to the story that I had no idea of when I began. I learned, for example, that because they were anti-family, they sent the kids of patients who had children already when they went into therapy away to boarding school at incredibly young ages. I interviewed a man who sent his 2 sons, aged 5 and 3, if you can believe it, away to boarding school. And many of these kids' lives were really crushed by that experience, and it was great to track them down and hear their stories. Many of them, because it was a polyamorous group, didn't know who their biological father were, or they were misinformed about who their biological father. So the story comes up to the present with all of these people learning, doing 23andMe and learning about their parentage. One of my main subjects learned in the course of my research that he had 3 biological children he didn't know about. So doing that kind of reporting while the story is actually moving in front of you was super, super interesting. But I won't go along because my watch is beeping, telling me that my 4 minutes are up. I didn't want to abuse your patience, but I did want to also thank you, my wife Erica, for living through the many drafts of the book, and all of you for honoring the book. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. We really, really enjoyed this whole program. One more round of applause for all of our winning authors. We have books for sale, of course, from our friends at the Corner Bookstore. Sasha's back here in the back of the room. And yes, yay for independent bookstores. And I am sure the authors would sign them for you. So thank you again for coming. And one last note, if I could get all the authors up here for a group picture, that would be great. Thank you very much. Enjoy.